Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Thursday, March 3rd. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we are moving through our outfield preview, which is probably a three-parter. And I think compared to Monday, when my lizard brain thought that maybe time would be of the essence, it is very clear to me now on this day, March 3rd, that time really is not of the essence as far as hurrying through these positional previews, because most likely your fantasy baseball draft or auction is not happening in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's probably happening more like in the next 6 to 8 weeks, because you're going to keep pushing the date back because you're going to want to be closer to whenever opening day is going to be. And now we know opening day is not the original opening day. So, we're going to take our sweet time because
we've got labor this weekend, so
we still have to do auctions and things. And I know like there's going to be some tough decisions on the horizon, probably for the high stakes leagues that are out there too. Like how much do you try to push those back? It's not a great time to be a commissioner of a league. So if you are frustrated with your commissioner for some reason, be kind to that person, because they are probably working for free and trying to make everyone happy, which is hard to do when no one's actually happy. But we hope
if you want
to.
an idea for how to proceed in a mono league, in a AL only or NL only, the decision that we made in labor is that the top 10, I believe, or top 12,
It was top 10 based on ADP.
the top 10 free agents that are unsigned are ineligible to be drafted.
Right. They're not available in the auction, but they will go into a separate fab run prior to the start of the season. Because in a mono league, at least in most mono leagues, the rule is if you sign a free agent player, or, get the player in the draft or the auction, and they go to the other league, you lose the stats. Now, there's some that are really cutthroat, where in season a trade across leagues causes you to lose those players. To me, that's like too far. Like you have no control over that. You have no way to know if a trade is actually going to happen in season. Even if you're talking about a pending free agent, it's just the sort of extra rule that you really don't need. But you do lose the player if they're a free agent and they sign the other league, and that impacts how they're treated on draft day. It's not great. You don't want a dozen really impactful players basically being lottery tickets and wreaking havoc on the league. So I think that was a good call by Steve Gardner.
But still,
make that
I'd
change.
say that the list of interesting free agents that are still out there is probably 15 to 20 deep, maybe.
Yeah, I would say at least. And
So you have to figure out how much you're going to spend on a player that will either give you all this value or give you zero value.
I think this year I might be more likely to take a couple of those end game spots that I usually use for prospects and just take the chance on some of the free agents, the guys that are outside that top 10.
I think that's a good way to think about it, because prospects are pretty all or nothing,
Yeah. Tommy Pham, I think is outside the top 10 in terms of free agent ADP. Like, I think he's pretty interesting because I don't think there's a clear indicator of AL versus NL for him. So if you're getting him at half of what he's projected to go for, or even less potentially, I think he's interesting. Or
would you pay a little bit more for Nelson Cruz? I guess maybe not. What if there's NLDH? They seem to be saying that it's like a possibility, likelihood. That kind of puts a wrinkle on things.
I think
who's obviously AL or NL. I don't think that's obvious in any way.
I'm in the NL labor auction Sunday, and I think Freddie Freeman is fairly obviously staying in the NL. I think that one, but he's not part of the auction. So if he, I guess the thought was before this rule came out was, what would I do if Freddie Freeman were out there? And I think I would have gone probably to the high teens, low 20s at least before bowing out, because I think there's a much better chance he's staying in Atlanta or going to the Dodgers or someplace like that, as opposed to changing leagues the other way. But it would have been a risky decision.
Soler, if there's a no NLDH, I think is more likely to be American League.
Yeah.
But Conforto and Pham could go either way.
Yeah. So those are the kinds of guys that I'm more interested in. Conforto, I think, is also not eligible. Also, you may have rules in your league that would technically make Seiya Suzuki unavailable. You should probably revisit those, because it sounds like he still intends to sign with a major league team as soon as the lockout is over. There's no reason to exclude him from the player pool at this point. So this Rules and technicalities segment has been brought to you by Rulers.
On to Outfielders.
On to the Outfielders, part 2, where we're looking at guys to start the show who go in the top 100 to 150 range. I think this is where this range of the draft board is where things get really fun at most positions, because it feels like you can find early rounders here, or you can draft players that lose a significant share of playing time. It's where that begins to happen. So feast or famine types do exist here. You can just find some steady eddies along the way too. But this group includes players like Mitch Haniger, Jesse Winker, Ryan Mountcastle, Kyle Schwarber, also currently a free agent, Chris Taylor, Jared Kelenic, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Austin Meadows, Myles Straw, and Trent Grisham. So you get about 10 outfielders in this group. And I think Haniger, I mean, obviously, if you're thinking about the players we talked about at the end of the Monday episode, you're looking at Cody Bellinger, you're looking at Christian Yelich, and then you're looking at Mitch Haniger, who did a lot of the things that you want those two guys to do in a typical year. He actually did it last year when he was healthy. I wonder if Haniger has been undervalued by me because of the injuries he was dealing with prior to last season. He had a major injury issue that kept him off the field for what felt like 2 years. And the bounce back last year, the full nature of his comeback was actually very impressive. The only thing he doesn't necessarily do is give you a plus contribution in batting average, but I don't really think he's going to hurt you there. You get a handful of bags. I think you've got a 30 home run projection and plenty of runs and RBIs too, because the lineup around him keeps getting better.
Yeah, he had a possibly misdiagnosed situation there where, they were prescribing a certain brand of rehab, and then he ended up having 2 surgeries. I think a kind of a hernia type situation, and maybe back. I don't know, but I know there was a kind of a double surgery that he had, and I kind of feel like, since they diagnosed that and since he had that, great season afterwards, that maybe he hit the reset button a little bit. I don't know that he's necessarily that risky of a play injury wise this coming season. And on top of that, as he's embraced all the modern training methods for hitters, and I think that's why he had such a good power output last year. But we both have talked about how he struck out a little bit more last year than he usually does, and I wonder if he can't attack that bit too. And if he does strike out more in line with his career rates, then I think you could see a batting average increase this coming season. Also, I'd like to point out that compared to I'd say every other player in this tier, he has the safest playing time. Yeah. I would say, when he is not hurt, he is in the lineup, and he needs to be in that lineup. He's the Mariners' best hitter, so he needs to be in the lineup. And every other one, if you start looking at them, has either a platoon issue or maybe a defense issue where they're going to be taken out in late in games, or as in the case of like a Chris Taylor, is just on a team that shuttles guys in and out and does load management, so you can actually see it in the auction calculator, in the projections. Mitch Haniger has the highest plate appearance projection in this tier, and for good reason, I think.
Yeah, the guy right next to him in ADP, Jesse Winker, has defensive issues that are less of a concern with universal DH. The problem is they have an infield crowd in Cincinnati that probably pushes a lot of playing time for Moustakas and Eugenio Suarez. You can kind of alternate who's playing third base, but the other guy's probably going to DH because those guys are both good hitters too. So they kind of have to put Winker out there defensively, and then maybe he loses the occasional late game plate appearance depending on situations. But Jesse Winker was on
weakness against lefties too.
A little bit, but they were playing him quite a bit against lefties over the course of the season. Like I think they're more in the let's see what happens mindset with him with that playing time. So I'm pretty optimistic about his chances from an opportunities standpoint of being closer to a max volume plate appearance guy than he's been in the past. The K rate's really good, 15.5% last year, double-digit barrel rate for the second straight season coming out of the pandemic-shortened year. I think this was a real power breakout for Jesse Winker. I think he could be a pretty sneaky 30 home run guy that actually gives you great batting average with it. And I think that's nice to get in this range, because a lot of the other mashers you find around pick 100 probably aren't going to hit 285, 290, or even possibly 300 while doing it.
Yeah, he was a win for a certain approach. I think I wrote a piece in 2019 about players with good strikeout rates and okay max EV and okay barrel rates. And he has elite plate discipline and really good strikeout rates. So, I think that's something to look for in young players, is somebody, when we talk about Wander Franco and like his projections and how his batted ball stats are kind of mediocre, but great contact rate and good chase rate. Wander Franco is a little bit like, pre-power breakout Winker. Right. So even if we think the projections don't love Wander Franco and, there isn't that much power and the batted ball stats don't look that good, they look good enough that he could take, fill out, whatever it is, to, have a slightly harder swinging approach, whatever it is, he could take that same leap that Winker took and be a 300 hitting, 30 homer, 10 steal shortstop, So I just wanted to point out that Winker's had this kind of cool growth that you can use to look for other players, which is to look for good plate discipline, good contact ability, and decent max EV, decent like average barrel rates. I think that's someone that can break out. I like him generally. I just don't have many shares of Winker and Haniger or of this tier in general. Because I'm doing other things at this part of the draft. And I also, other than Winker and Haniger, see a lot of playing time risk.
Are you also looking at Kyle Schwarber in this range as a guy that has nice power, but also doesn't seem to have another level that he's going to reach? I mean, I wonder if we've already seen the best of what he can do as a hitter, and I hope he can continue to play first base somewhere. That'd be a nice development long term to get him over there as opposed to having him in the outfield. Um, I don't know. Like I'm a little bit torn on Schwarber, because on a per plate appearance basis, what he was doing in 2021 was really exciting. I'm just not sure if he can actually hold anything close to that rate over a full season.
I think that's a thing to worry about. I do think he's closed a hole in his swing. He used to have a hole up in the zone. I think that's where you see some of the ups and downs in his career, and that he's the most complete hitter he's ever been in terms of like having a swing that can cover the top of the zone and the bottom of the zone. You've seen some of the better strikeouts of his career last year, rates of his career. So I believe he can be a 250, 260 hitter, and you're not going to get back to that 188, 211 type real batting average risk he's been in the past. So I like him as a player, but I will say, and this is something we talked about off air, that the risk of being a very like drafting only by the dollar sign in your auction calculator is that you miss what happens in the room and you miss sort of concepts of scarcity. And so what I have seen is I left Schwarber and Haniger to some extent. I know I just said some nice things about Haniger, and I do think that he's going to hit for better batting average than Schwarber, and probably steal a couple more bases and play more plate appearances than Schwarber. But I put Haniger in a bit of a tier, like a grouping of all power, very little speed, not necessarily plus batting average group of players. And that group of players in my queue, how do you say it? Has resiliency. You know what I mean? Like they're still there. Like Schwarber's gone, but like there are other players in this tier that I feel like I like Austin Meadows will be there forever. And Schwarber dropped, and Meadows is dropping, and there are other players just like that that are dropping, and so I think it's okay to take one of these guys. I'm just saying take them after ADP. Is what I'm saying, basically.
I guess the concern with Schwarber has been previous opportunities against lefties, and more recently some injuries also being sprinkled in. But the power is really impressive. I mean, this is one of the few guys you're going to look at and you're going to see some hard hit and barrel percentages that look like Tyler O'Neill's hard hit and barrel percentages, and that's pretty exciting to get in this range. But I have had that same problem that you described, where there's been something else I've needed. I needed to start bolstering my starting rotation. I needed to start thinking about a second closer, or even just making sure that I had someone that would run in this range, because the quality players that would steal bases were drying up. And all of those things have kept me away from Schwarber so far. But if he finds a spot where he can once again get into that low 600 plate appearance range like we saw in 2019, maybe we do see another season where he's
threat to
high 30s,
40.
low 40s. Yeah.
Yeah, he hit 40.
That's totally possible with the raw skills that he has. It just takes a couple of things breaking right, and then part of that is landing in the right place.
This is also why I like tiers. I like to do tiers plus auction value. So what I will do is look at the auction calculator, judge a tier, which sometimes is really obvious. If you sort by dollars, you'd be like, whoa, it goes from a bunch of $12 players to like $7 players, right? So you see a tier, take that tier, throw them into your queue, and do that for a couple positions of need, so that you have, basically in your top 10 in the queue, you have 3 outfielders, 3 third basemen, 2 closers, and 2 starting pitchers that represent the end of their tier. And what you'll see if you do that, maybe you do it for 20 or 25 players, but what you'll see is that you can really quickly look and be like, whoa, listen, closers are never going to look good in the auction calculator, right? And there's only 2 left that I like, which is kind of where I am right now in TGFBI, but there's 2 left that I like. And yes, the auction calculator is screaming at me to take Kyle Schwarber, but there's only 2 closers left I like at all. So I'm going to have to take one of these closers, even though the auction calculator differences, because if I don't get Schwarber, there's Austin Meadows who are going to make it back to me in the next round. So, and I think that Meadows showed enough actually last year not to sort of jump around the rundown too much. But I think that Meadows showed enough to me last year that I think he can be very Schwabian. Like he can get out there and, strike out 27% of the time, 25% of the time. Last year, he only struck out 21% of the time. So if he strikes out 21, 22% of the time, why can't he hit 260, 275? And the barrel rates are good. The max EV is good. The fly ball rate is good. Like, I think he's taking the most advantage of his power set as there might be. It might be a low BABIP, and that'll keep his batting average low because he hits a lot of fly balls. But, Meadows is Schwarber light with a couple extra steals. I think will be there for you a couple rounds later.
Yeah, I think that's what's kept me away from Ryan Mountcastle in the same range too. I mean, I think you could say Mountcastle's more like Mitch Haniger playing time wise, and maybe both Meadows and Schwarber, depending on where he goes, because those guys are on better teams. Maybe they lose just a little bit of playing time because of the depth around them. That could be a slight difference between them. But generally, I'm just kind of out on this cluster because I see good value in the outfield later. And I think what I've also been doing from a roster construction standpoint, I've been trying to make up ground in stolen bases in the outfield. So the 240, 250 masher, good value in this spot. But if I've got plenty of power already, it's not the player type that I necessarily need. So yeah, maybe these guys are going a round or 2, maybe even 3 rounds later than they should in a vacuum. But it doesn't necessarily matter if I've got a good power base already, and I'm going to be short on speed if I don't address that category. I'm going to be short on steals if I don't address that category. I think to me, that's the better argument against these players than anything within their individual profiles.
But if you took Trey Turner or Fernando Tatis or Cedric Mullins or Adalberto Mondesi, actually Adalberto Mondesi, I'm a little bit worried about the batting average, so that's not a great one. But if you took Turner or Tatis or Mullins, or I'm not sure what Acuna's steals will look like this year, but maybe him early on, that does open you up a little bit for taking somebody out of this tier, which seems a little bit undervalued at times.
Yeah, the other players in this group that I think are definitely worth bringing up, Jarred Kelenic. I mean, I think he just falls into this projection void of having a rough big league debut, which drags down his 2022 projection a lot. And I think when you compare that to what you see for Bobby Witt Jr., who destroyed AAA for a year and is projected to be immediately good, it makes the lights go off. The caution lights start going off in my head. I'm like, wait a minute. If Jarred Kelenic, who was good on a per plate appearance basis at AAA, had just stayed at AAA and dominated there, would the projection systems like him more than they do for failing at the big league level? And I think the answer is yes. I think the level of struggle that we saw from Kelenic has a significant impact on your actual 2022 projection. We saw this a couple of years ago with Kyle Tucker. I think this is a good other recent example of a guy that came up, didn't play a ton, didn't play well. Projection systems bury him for it. And, now you have to kind of make a decision for yourself. How much growth are we going to see? I don't think we're getting that much of a discount in the draft market on Jared Kelenic because there's been plenty of hype and there was some signs of progress from him with plate skills over the course of his rookie season. But I'm curious, have you been tempted to draft Kelenic in this range under the assumption that there's power and speed and maybe some other slash line elements of that projection that are probably undershot because of just how rough the debut was?
Yeah, there's definitely the shape of a player's career and the shape of his success and failures, matters a lot to, our recency bias and what we think of a guy. We see Kelenic's debut and we put him in a place and we decide not to revisit that. He had an interesting thing where his reach rate was very different. In the first 20 games in his debut, he reached at pitches outside the zone 38% of the time. And that's awful. That's bad. Then in the next 20, he was a little bit more like 28% of the time, which is better. I mean, he kind of kept it steady for the middle 40. He was like sort of an average reach rate guy. And then it spiked again. And he was back up to 40% at the end of the season. And then his last sort of 20 games of the season, he only reached it like 25% of the pitches he saw. And that was the best stretch of the season for him WOBA wise too. And I have a bias towards hitters that don't reach and hit the ball hard. He has the ability maybe to do both of those things, but hasn't really done both of those things at the same time. But I do think that debut, the fact that he showed power and speed, I think, and the fact that he had such great strikeout rates in the minors, not that crazy of a swing strike rate, and then this reach rate that went up and down. I think I should have more shares of him than I do.
Yeah, because it could be the kind of thing where, you feel good about the 20 homers and the 10 steals that you see for most of the projection systems, but you don't want to draft him because, well, he's at 220 batting average. I don't want that. Well, I would take the over.
Not that far from being, a good batting average guy. I still wonder about the OBP. I still wonder if he's really going to walk a lot. I think he might settle in at 8% walk rate or 9% walk rate, which is just about average. And then maybe like a 24% strikeout rate. If you give him that, like Steamer does, you get a 232 average, which is one of the better ones. Now you add a little bit of power. I don't know. I think he could hit 250. I think he could hit 260. I don't know. I don't know that he's locked into 220. And even at 220, I think the auction calculator is saying that he's worth it here.
Yeah. I think
not really, actually. Now that I look, auction calculators is $5. Everybody else in this tier is, like Haniger is 16, Schwarber is 15, Meadows is 14. So actually, Kelenic is an outlier when it comes to the auction calculator.
Yeah, but that's the I guess that the broader point that I was trying to make is just like, well, the auction calculator is going to be low because the projections are jacked up because he debuted in some pretty unusual circumstances. I think it's fair to say no 2020 minor league season, making the leap to the big leagues. It's a bigger leap than usual. All of the things that people have been talking about, that all makes sense. The up and down fluctuations in his O swing percentage are interesting because you could say, well, he's showing the ability to cut back on that. Or maybe he's trying to be too aggressive and just needs to dial that back. Or maybe he's just being fooled. Like the cause of those fluctuations, I think, is still somewhat debatable, right? Like, is it the kind of thing that is fixable? Like, I would argue it probably is, but we don't know. Like, everybody's going to be different in that regard.
Well, what if I could offer you in a would you rather? What if I could offer you a player that has top 5 reach rates in baseball, has already demonstrated that he has 25 homer power and will steal more than 10 bases next year and won't hit 220, goes in the same range, and has a better auction calculator number. Wouldn't you just take that guy? Strikes, swings and misses less,
You
walks
should take that
more.
guy.
Shouldn't you just take that guy?
You should take the player that does all the things that you want the other player to do
Right,
already.
exactly.
If the prices are equal, like, it'd be like,
Trent
well,
Grisham does all the things you want Jared Kelenic to do, except maybe have, that power upside. But Trent Grisham had an 11% barrel rate in 2020. So I think I would argue that he has better power upside than people are giving credit for.
yeah, I think there's a couple things about Grisham that are great. I mean, he's 24 for 30 now as a base stealer, so continued green lights when you're successful 80% of the time. He draws walks, so he gets on base a lot for a speedster. Even if you're looking for 15 bags, someone who gets on base at a 330, 340 clip is at least putting himself in a position to have those stolen base opportunities. And maybe you're right. Maybe people are sleeping a little bit on the power. Grisham as a prospect, I mean, I just remember this profile being so weird. We looked at him maybe 2 or so years ago on the show. He had this problem where he wasn't pulling anything, which I think is a good problem to have. If you can take everything the other way, that's a good skill. The only concern would be, well, what happens if you get fastballs in? Can you not handle pitches in, or do you just simply not want to pull the ball because you can go the opposite way? And I think we're seeing over time that he can handle inside pitches better than we might have thought as a prospect, right? You're not going to necessarily just jam him all the time and get away with it. And he was a league average hitter last season, 103 WRC plus, 242, 327, 413. It's not a sexy slash line, but I think the things that we'd like to get excited about, homer, steals, runs, and RBIs, when you play as much as Grisham is likely to play in this offense, good things tend to happen. So I think he could be a do everything except for batting average sort of player, and maybe it's
But
2020
not when
instead
you
of
say except for
50.
batting average, more like treading water, like not
He's not
he's
going
like
to hurt. He's not going to. Yeah, he's not going to
he's
hit
not a
220 like
negative
you said.
anywhere. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's like, do you want the 240 guy that bops 35 homers, or do you want the 240 guy that might go 2020?
Yeah.
Like I'd rather actually take the chance on the 240 2020 guy because of the second 20. I can find extra power somewhere else later if I need it. And I think you're getting enough runs and RBIs to go along with it, where I think Grisham hits high in the order against righties. When he plays against lefties, he gets buried. That's fine. I can live with that. So I'm with you. I think he's undervalued. I think he's a great would you rather for Kelenic for 2022 only, even though I think both of us, if we were in a keeper or dynasty scenario, would probably lean more towards Kelenic having the higher long-term ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah, I give you
Maybe
that.
not. Maybe you
No,
like
I
Grisham
give
more
you
long
that. I
term.
mean, I would be the kind that would trade Kelenic for Grisham plus if
That would be that's
if it
that's
made sense for me.
optimizing. Yes,
Yeah.
that is optimizing for the entire scenario. The other player that goes in this range is a guy that I never draft, Myles Straw. Would you like to make a case for Myles Straw being either better than I think or fitting really well in this range in a certain scenario?
I mean, I'm basically allergic to players that have a 1% barrel rate.
Yep.
I can't really speak to that. The one nice thing though is that he does have Grishamian, Vautoian reach rates. He's really good at the plate discipline aspect, and he makes a ton of contact. The swing strike rates are around 4% for the 2/3 of his career. So for his career, 4.8%. That's really, really good. So he's going to make a lot of contact. He's going to be really patient. He won't give you any power, but the fact that he can make a lot of contact and be really patient might keep him atop of that lineup. The defense seems to agree that he's very good. The Indians or the Guardians, have for a long time been looking for a center fielder. I don't necessarily think Brad Zimmer is going to take the job, but I do have to mention Zimmer, Mercado, and Stephen Kwan are all behind him on the depth chart, and all of them will have a better than 1% barrel rate next year.
Yeah, center field defense matters enough where if you can also get on base, I think that keeps the playing time afloat for Straw. If you
Inciarte.
a lot, yeah, because a lot of guys like that don't walk as much as Myles Straw has walked so far. A lot of those,
Ooh, I'm checking Inciarte's walk rate.
I would bet a large sum of money that he never had a double-digit walk rate.
Oh. Aha! You're wrong once in
One time.
230 plate appearances.
Yeah, so we'll call
Career
that a push.
7% walk rate. Yeah. So
Okay.
that I think that's that's a difference. It's Ender Inciarte with plus patience.
Yeah, and I think that is good enough to keep him afloat. I would say
But Ender Inciarte was viable in fantasy for like for 4 years, 5 years maybe.
Myles Straw to me is more of the I got caught up getting value or chasing everything else, and I solved everything but steals, and now I need to
I
take
took everything the
my
auction
last
value.
shot.
I took everything the auction calculator told me to take, and I have no guys with steals.
Right, like, I think he's on your list of like A plan, B plan, C plan, different things that could happen. I don't think he's the guy you wanna have all the time. Like, I don't think I don't think he's stable enough as a hitter, even with his strengths, to be the kind of player that you'd wanna have on all of your teams. And I'm gonna get laughed at so hard if he steals 50 bases this year, but, uh,
Yeah.
it's just one of those just like we said with Grisham, 46 for 55 as a base stealer, plenty of green lights. That OBP skill is so important because if he didn't have that, he could be a bottom third of the order hitter, so then he'd be a drag in runs and RBIs, and, like that with very little power, he'd be a very tough player to build around. But I think because he could be very good even in runs scored, and because he's not going to be bad in batting average, and he's going to be great in steals, the case for Myles Straw is one that I'm warming up to in the right circumstances, but I have not yet done it. I have not yet built a team lacking speed to the point where I said, yes, Myles Straw is the solution to my problems right here. I've tried to go more balanced, and I've tried to put those stolen bases into profiles that I like, that are more well-rounded overall, as opposed to I'm getting 30 here from this guy, even though I think there's a couple things that could go wrong for him.
What do you think of this? Would you rather a guy going 40 picks lower, doesn't have the same plus speed, but is projected for, at least by one projection system, 25 steals, but has a 9% barrel rate, good reach rates, and just swings and misses more often? Akil Baddoo.
I thought it might be Akil Baddoo. I
It's
mean,
more in
as
your 2020, crowd,
yeah, and I think just holding your own after his extra lengthy absence. I mean, he got hurt in 2019, only played 29 games that year, so he missed the rest of that season. Didn't play in 2020, and then was a Rule 5 pick, making the leap to the big leagues, and it was above average player. He had a 108 WRC plus. It's just flat out amazing. I
Rule
think that's the
5,
type
sixth
of
selection, yeah.
I'd rather do that than rely on Myles Straw. But I think you're getting that little discount for a reason. The Tigers outfield situation is probably even more crowded than the Guardians. There's probably more risk that Baddoo doesn't play against lefties, whereas Myles Straw, I think, could be
Because
that max volume, plays every single day. I don't know if Baddoo is going to get that opportunity.
that might be true, because you got Robbie Grossman. You're going to have Riley Green after not too long. You've got Daz Cameron and Victor Reyes still hanging out, trying to make their case. And you might even have Eric Haas playing some outfield like he did last year.
It would be amazing if Baddoo showed enough in limited chances against lefties, or if the Tigers said, we're going to do what the Padres do with Trent Grisham. We like having you on the field all the time. Maybe we value the defense, whatever it is they want to use to keep him on the field. Give him that opportunity, even if he has to drop in the order. I'd rather get the playing time and get some counting stats than get none. If you think that scenario plays out, then I think you should love Akil Baddoo where he's going right now, because it is a well balanced profile.
I do, having, listed all those names out, I mean, I do think Baddoo has more long-term upside than Daz Cameron and Victor Reyes.
Oh yeah. At this point, not even close.
And if the season falls apart a little bit on the Tigers, Grossman, I don't believe, is under contract after this year. He's a free agent 2023. Yeah, so he could be an easy trade candidate. If they're, I mean, it doesn't even have to fall apart. Even if they're a 500 team, I guess they could keep them and try to be like, hey, we made progress this year. But if somebody's willing to give them something that they're interested, even a relief prospect, because their relievers aren't that great, So if they could even get a reliever for Robbie Grossman for 2 months, they might do that.
They could just re-sign him if they really like him. And it sounds like they do in their organization. And so who knows? I mean, we've seen teams do things like that. And this is the group of guys that go kind of in the 150 to 200 overall range. So you get Alex Verdugo in there, Hunter Renfroe, Baddoo, Joey Gallo, Adolis García, Avisaíl García, Alex Kirilloff, Eddie Rosario, Dylan Carlson, Marcell Ozuna, Jorge Soler, Andrew Benintendi, Seiya Suzuki, Robbie Grossman, and Michael Conforto. That is a group of outfielders full of names that I like. There's
I'm back in. I'm kind of back in. Yeah.
There's risk, but I think what it comes down to is there's not a lot that separates the first group of players that we've talked about from this group of players.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why so many of those guys, even if I like their profiles in the 100 to 150 range, have been ending up on other people's rosters. Verdugo is just kind of the does everything sort of player that what is within that skills profile is like, what is there to not like? I guess you could wish that he ran more maybe or had a little more power, but at least getting a little bit of everything, he keeps you sort of on track for all of your categorical targets where he goes.
It may not happen because he's further into his career than Jesse Winker was, but it is the Jesse Winker profile.
Mm-hmm.
Decent barrel rates, great discipline, good discipline, great contact ability. This is the kind of player that could make a small tweak to his approach and say, hey, I'm going to, be a high ball hitter now, and could see his ground ball rates change, see his power change. So, I think he's, pre-power breakout Winker. And so therefore he's very, very safe at the projections, I believe. And then also has more upside beyond than people may give him credit for. I mean, he's still only 25, I believe. Yeah, he's still only 25 years old. And I don't think his team is going to platoon him. So, I think he's a really good pick there. The double digit, there's still some double digit players here, even though players like Gurriel, Kelenic, and Straw are projected by the calculator for less than double digits. In this group, there are double digit players in Verdugo, Renfroe, Gallo, Avisaíl García, Dylan Carlson, Marcell Ozuna, Andrew Benintendi. So, this is a group of players I like because you're still getting that double digit auction value calculator value, and you can even get some speed in there. Avisaíl García, Verdugo has a handful. Adolis García has some speed. I think there's some potential in some of the other names that we'll get to. So, yeah, this is a place I like to shop.
It's interesting that there's a few guys here that have what look like almost identical profiles. Hunter Renfroe, who is replacing Avisaíl García in Milwaukee. Garcia gets a park downgrade going to Miami and probably even a slight supporting cast downgrade, at least based on how things are right now. And the Brewers had plenty of issues putting runs on the board, so that could be a little way of eroding some of those counting stats. But you get power and speed, 20 homers and 10 steals with an average that won't hurt you.
He's the best across the board guy in here. He's the best, gives you everything in this group, I think. Verdugo is close, but I think it's actually Avisaíl García who goes 20 picks later.
Yeah, because you start to get into the Renfroe profile, and that's almost more like Adam Duvall to me. Like you're giving up a little potential batting average for some extra power, and that can be a pretty risky game to play as well.
Yeah, so Avisaíl García, I think, is like perennially underrated. People don't understand how athletic he is, and yes, sometimes it's tough to watch him defensively or whatever. But You know,
Yeah,
he's a really good player.
miscast as a occasional center fielder, but to even be an occasional center fielder, you have to be reasonably athletic. And because he's big. We've said this before, but he also cut a ton of weight, I think, in the 2020 season and kept that off too. So the transformation for him is also, I think, a part of why I believe he's able to sustain a much better floor further into his career than I would have thought 3 or 4 years ago. Joey Gallo goes in this range. What do you do with Joey Gallo? I mean, we kind of talked about it in the sense of like Myles Straw is I don't have enough speed. I have everything else. What if you had a lot of speed and you had a good batting average foundation? You said, I need power. I need power. I need a guy that's probably not going to get many days off. And I'm positioned to take one big batting average hit. Do you think Joey Gallo is underrated because the projections love him in terms of homers, RBIs, and runs? Because if he hits just on those projections, even with a 213 average, he should be going earlier than he's going.
I think it's just that 213 average, man. I think, to make one average guy, to make one to mitigate him just to average level. So let's say you have a plus batting average. You have to have a player. I guess you could. What would you do if you put Michael Brantley and him together?
Yeah. What's the final line from those two players?
I can do that pretty quickly, but I think you can mitigate a Gallo strategy, and Gallo drops in leagues because of that poor batting average. So I think it's a play. But I just tell you, man, I'm in most leagues, I'm jealously guarding batting average because it's a really difficult stat, and I just don't really want to drop behind in it. If it's a mono league, I'm all on board because I mostly just punt batting average, or don't think about it too hard because it's just really hard to keep it going. If you combined Michael Brantley and Joey Gallo last year, you got 1,124 plate appearances. That's pretty good, almost 600 each. You got a 253 batting average, which I would say is actually below average for fantasy, right? So you would need to do more than Michael Brantley, but you would have gotten 46 homers and 7 stolen bases from the two of them. You'd actually be behind on stolen bases too. So what we're looking for from the average player in fantasy in 15-team leagues is about a 270 average, 25 homers, and 7 to 8 stolen bases. So you're still behind the batting average, and you are still behind the stolen bases.
What about runs? Combo. What about runs and RBIs? Like both of those guys should be above.
Well, last year it wasn't great. 158 runs, 124 RBI.
Yeah, so I guess if you look at it that way, you'd say, well, why wouldn't you just take guys that hit 250 with 20 homers and 6 steals that are?
That's what I try to do.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stay above those benchmarks with every player, and I'm trying to do it across the board as long as possible, because that keeps you spry. You know what I mean? That allows you to take advantage of fallers better. So, if you've built a certain team up to this point and you think you think you have a 290 batting average already, then I think you can throw Jack Gallo in there for the power. But it's a tough one team building wise, I think.
It is difficult to have that much surplus in batting average, but it does take more than one player. I think a 220, 230 guy, maybe you can get away with only like one really good batting average player to start to offset that if you've done pretty well elsewhere, but got to keep close tabs on that category. Adolis García is like one of those guys that I look at and I'm like, no chance. I can't do it. I know he's a good defender in center field, but he led the league last season with swinging strikes on elevated fastballs. Seems very specific, but that just seems like the kind of problem.
Just a hole.
He's just not going to fix that. He had 150 swinging strikes.
Already 29 years old.
On elevated fastballs. If you can't hit high fastballs when you're 29, it's over. It's not going to happen. So it could be like, what's the best case scenario for him? Why would you
take center field? Lourdes Taveras hits for like a 70 WRC plus, and Garcia hits for a 90 WRC plus, and takes center field from him. Man, but even then, he'll hit 220. with 25, 27 homers and 10 stolen bases or so. I don't know.
What a fun season a year ago, though.
Yeah, but it's like a bad version of Joey Gallo.
It's a scarier version of Dylan Moore, I think, is what it is. Because coming out of the shortened season, 8 homers, 12 steals in 38 games for Dylan Moore, held his own with batting average. Like Dylan Moore's underlying profile actually makes more sense to me as a big league player than Garcia's.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at the shape of Garcia's season, like it's actually, we're talking about the shape of Kelenic's season, right? Garcia's is the opposite, where he did so well up front and even showed some discipline, and then it all went away. For the first 40 games of the season, he swung at 30% of strikes outside the strike zone, right? And you're like, well, that's not a problem. Everyone said that was a problem in his profile. He climbed to 50% over the next 40 games. He was swinging at 50% of the pitches he saw outside the zone. Now that calmed down a little bit, but he ended up around 40% for the season. That's not good. And his WOBA was peaked 60 games in and just went in a free fall after that. And he was below average. He was a 200 WOBA player for like his last 40 games. So I think the league kind of figured him out, and I have 0 shares and I have zero want for shares.
I think that's right, but I want to present the other side that I'd sort of just forgotten about. Donnie Ecker is the hitting coach or the offensive coordinator and hitting instructor now in Texas.
Yeah, but you can't
fix that.
No, I'm just saying you can't spread that much love. I think even Donnie Ecker would rather, like, Donnie Ecker did a really good job with Lamont Wade, right? What did Lamont Wade have inherently that Garcia doesn't have?
The ability to hit the strike balls.
No. And also the sense of the strike zone, And what did Ecker do? So yes, here's what the one thing Ecker could do. Maybe help him solve the high fastball thing, right? Because that was one thing Lamont Wade could do. He couldn't do anything with the inside fastball. Ecker and his team and Wade's team, they all worked on a way for him to sort of clear his hips and get through faster and hit the inside pitch. So that helped him untap a little bit of power. But it all came with a baseline of knowing where the strike zone is, which Garcia doesn't have. And also Wade has good bat to ball skills, which Garcia doesn't have. So maybe Ecker could help him mitigate something, like find a way to spit on the high fastball, right? But then he's like pre-breakout Schwarber or Cody, like young Cody Bellinger, somebody who can only hit the low pitch and just spits on the high pitch. There's another name for that, Brandon Moss. Yeah. He's Brandon Moss.
I mean, it's just like
a lot of similarities with Brandon Moss, actually.
31 homers, 16 steals, 16 for 21 as a base stealer. If he could just find a way to strike out less or draw more walks or not swing through as many high fastballs, there are interesting traits there. But yeah, there's a lot working against Adolis García. But I felt like it was wrong to not bring that up because that is a big change in Texas that I think has us kind of excited about a few different bats that have been kicking around there for at least a little while.
And his defense is interesting enough where he could take center field. So that's definitely worth thinking about. That there's I guess the deeper the league and the cheaper the price, the more I'm a little bit interested, But there are 2 names in this tier that are young players that showed enough with the advanced stats that we like that by projections are already good enough to go in this tier, but have, I think, some upside beyond their projections.
Right. I think Dylan Carlson is the one. I just missed him on TGFBI by 3 picks. I had shots at him.
Oh, and you were looking at him.
I thought he was going to fall more than I've ever seen him fall. I guess this kind of goes back to part of the Kelenic conversation. Like, you can believe that Jared Kelenic is going to take that step, and you can believe that he's underprojected. But would you rather just take the guy a little later who also has growth potential, who's already shown that he can hold his own over a full
pre-peak age-wise?
Yeah, you're getting a lot of the same growth potential elements that you're looking for in a player. So why would you not just wait a few rounds and get that in Carlson? I think the way I look at Carlson, I'm also surprised that he hasn't done a little bit more on the base paths because the Cardinals like to run. They've had some issues scoring runs during his brief time in the big leagues. You'd think that would continue to give a lot of players green lights. He gets on base a lot, and he's certainly not slow. Like that, he's just one of those guys that doesn't run yet in the big leagues, but I could see him becoming a 10 to 12 steal guy relatively quickly, especially if there's not a big uptick in power. I could see the speed being the thing where he makes up some ground and adds some roto value.
Yeah, he's got the times to first over at some baseball savant. Times to first are more predictive of stolen base ability than sprint speeds. And Dylan Carlson has the same times to first as Oscar Mercado, Marcus Simeon, Francisco Lindor, Nate Lowe, Gregory Polanco, Lorenzo Cain. He's faster than Lorenzo Cain, faster than Chris Bryant. So, I mean, I think this suggests a real opportunity for 10 stolen bases. And, when you look at the group.
And you're getting a player who cut his strikeout rate last year, improved his walk rate, and showed some power. 18 home runs in 149 games, playing half your games in Busch Stadium. Hit the ball in the air more often last year. Those are all underlying things that we're looking for in a player. So for me, if you said, would you rather Kelenic or Carlson, especially accounting for the difference in price this year, I think it's Dylan Carlson, and it's actually not that close. I think if it's straight up even, I'd probably take Carlson.
Yeah, I think so. The next one, the other young player that I was thinking about is, I think, not as quite as slam dunk as Carlson, because Carlson is already projected for what is it, $11 of value. This guy, Alex Kirilloff, is only projected for $7, and they go basically at the same point in drafts. So, given that, I would rather have more picks. I'd rather have, at that point, I'd rather have Carlson. But if Alex Kirilloff drops at all, I become interested. And he doesn't do the reach rate thing very well, or he hasn't. And he has a history of lower walk rates in the minors. So he's a little bit of an aggressive hitter, but I think he has a pretty good hit tool given that aggressiveness. And he had a 13% barrel rate last year that I really like. So I think that the projections are undervaluing that power, or undervaluing the playing time, the type of playing time he will get with that power. So I think he unlocks that power, and then these sub 500 plate appearance projections look a little light, and he ends up with 600 plate appearances, a 270 average, and 25 homers. So, I think that's something that Kirilloff can do pretty easily. Now you want to pay the $7 price and get the $12 return instead of paying the $12 price. So that's where like hype kind of becomes a thing, right? Right now he's going among players that are more expensive, that are projected for more value. He's not going to give you steals. He doesn't have a really good reach rate. So I'm arguing for and against him in the same sentence.
It's hard to do, but you're doing it.
I'm the king of waffles. I'll say this. I'll just say, if he drops to like 200 or 190 or something, I'm all over him. I just want to bake in a little bit of that risk.
Yeah, I think that's pretty consistently something you could see happen. His ADP is 175 in the second half of February, so you could be sitting there in that range, and it could make a lot of sense. I mean, there's a guy that he was basically going to replace last year, Eddie Rosario. We don't know where he's going to play. I think had he not gone on the run that he went on in the postseason last year, he probably wouldn't be in this tier, but it happened, and here he is. It was interesting that he had 11 steals last season. He's kind of quietly become more efficient as a base stealer. He was 8 for 10 back in 2018. I think he was 6 for 8 between 2019 and 2020. We're not talking about a guy that's going to necessarily by himself make a massive difference in the category, but he's chipping in those long tail steals that are pretty helpful if you're trying to go with that more balanced approach. And I think we're starting to see like the lower end of his batting average range as a player that doesn't strike out a lot. He's got a 259 average last year, 257 in the shortened season. There's room for him to be good in that category. And I'm just really curious to see where Eddie Rosario ends up landing as a free agent once we get back to that phase.
He's amazing because he's really easy to project. Like he has, there's not much risk in his projections. You know, he has a 310 OBP for his career. He has a 305 last year, 316, 300, 323 in the last 4 years, right? So he's like right there. He has a 275 batting average for his career. He's been at 260, 276, 280 in the last 4 years. Boom, right there. He has a 198 ISO for his career. It was basically 180 last year, 219 the year before, 191. He basically is the same guy every year at the plate, where he has a decent batting average, a poor OBP, good power, and some speed. And therefore, he looks like a really safe bet. However, I would point out to you that in the last 3 years, he's put up 3 wins combined in terms of wins by replacement. He is a poor defender with a poor plate approach. And I think that's just the type of player that is not valued in baseball these days. And that's not going to change. And I think he's more likely to sign with a team to be a part-time player than to be awarded a full-time role. And so even though he's easy to project, I'm out on him.
So I think Eddie Rosario could end up being the A's DH for a discount because of the way the league works, right? I think he could end up with a surplus of playing time, a better spot in the order.
He's a second division starter,
right?
If that exists. So if he ends up on a bad team, then I guess he could see a lot of playing time.
That's just kind of what I expect. I don't think a good team wants that profile all year. I think a good team is fine with that profile when they're looking at ways to
for the
fix the
playoffs.
bottom half of the lineup, right? And yeah, you love what he could do as a hitter, and if you could take the defense out of the equation, I don't know, maybe you get a little bump in his overall production. It was the year of the rabbit ball, 32 homers back in 2019, but a few 20 homer seasons before that. I think he can get back to that level if he lands in the aforementioned second division scenario. But you're right. This is exactly the profile that major league teams don't value very well.
And right now, especially, I'd much rather know. I think he's one of those ones where where he lands really means a lot.
Yep. I could definitely see that kind of dictating whether or not he kicks up or continues to slide a little bit in ADP. Let's get to Robbie Grossman just for a minute. You mentioned him a little earlier. I have a hard time looking at the profile. I know Cody Stavenhagen wrote a lot about the changes that Grossman made, and some of those changes even started in Oakland.
Yeah.
It's so hard to look at the 2020 Robbie Grossman, the first time he did it in his entire career in his 30s, and say, I totally believe that he's running that back. But he's always done a great job of getting on base.
He even added some barrel rate.
The little bit of a strikeout rate uptick is worth it because it came with the added barrels. Like if you start to just take away he's old and we saw it for so long and he didn't do this, if you just take that away, if you looked at him and he said if a 26-year-old guy did what Robbie Grossman did last season, he'd go 50 plus picks earlier in drafts. But because Robbie Grossman did it at 31, people like me, at least, are very skeptical. And I think that could be maybe a hole in my game. So when you look at Robbie Grossman, do you think 2020 is actually still on the table? Projections point to him at least as a 15-15 guy, which where he's going is fine. If that's all he ends up being this year, that's going to be okay as long as he's playing on a near everyday basis and racking up those counting stats again.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think is you look at the 20 steals and you say, wow, he never stole even 10 before. However, you have to recognize that he was a part-time player for most of his career.
Mm-hmm.
So, the 8 stolen bases in Oakland came at 192 plate appearances. The 9 the year before came in 482. So, he's kind of showed this speed before. He's shown the ability to at least, so I think he's safe for 10 plus. And, given that he seems locked in for all the playing time he wants, I think, especially if he's going to hit for his projected 10% better than league average, then I think he's going to get 15 stolen bases because even these projections seem a little light on playing time. 574 plate appearances for the bat, 571 for Zips. Why should he do that? I think if he's healthy, he's going to play. And I don't know. I think the age makes him cheaper than he should be.
All right. So maybe after months and months of passing on him at a discount to my own peril, maybe now I will wise up and take a few flyers on Grossman in this range, because it makes sense. Like it's a well balanced profile, and it's probably a much higher lineup position. He's always had good OBP skills, like I said, but it's a much higher OBP position or lineup position locked in because of where he plays. Like who are the Tigers going to use to bump him out of a prominent spot in the lineup? Like even if you bring up Green and
They need
Torkelson,
hitters.
they need guys to get on base for the young guys.
Yeah.
And Grossman
And
does that.
I would say this, like I run the auction calculator for the bat on Fangraphs. There's a 574 plate appearance thing, so he only ends up an $8 player, and he doesn't look that great in there. Baseball Prospectus has an auction calculator as well. And what's kind of cool about what they do is not only can you change the slider on performance and say, hey, well, I want to look at what a 60th percentile Robbie Grossman looks like in terms of performance. They also have a slider that you can change the plate appearance. So you could say, let me slide him up to 80, 90% plate appearances so that you get a 650 out of him or something. And let me see what his auction value looks like then. So that's a really cool thing about the Axe, I believe it's called, on Baseball Prospectus. Really cool tool they have there.
Even with the uptick in barrels, don't expect much of an increase in batting average. I mean,
that's where barrels go to die. It's one
just,
of the nicknames for that park.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen based on how things are going. That's the only category where he might end up being very fringy or even a tick below average, depending on how it plays. But cheap speed is hard to find, especially from guys that don't seem to have a lot of playing time risk. And I think this is
how bad is a 250 12-12 season going to hurt you?
At pick 200, it's not.
Yeah,
it shouldn't. You're probably going to roster him all year. If that happens. Oatmeal with a chance to be oatmeal that has chopped up apples and pecans and a drizzle of something good in it.
What's funny is that I think this other guy, Andrew Benintendi, I think has actually ended up, in the oatmeal category as well, where, people wanted so much more for him. But last year's season, 276 with 17 homers and 8 stolen bases is totally fine. And he may end up a little bit more heavy on the power than the speed side.
The thing about Benintendi, and I'll wrap it up. I'll just explain what I think he was going to say. I mean, with Benintendi, 8 for 17 as a base stealer, more of a batting average floor, probably a little more risk in the stolen base profile. But we're talking about a guy that has a good power speed base, should get plenty of playing time, and also has an improving lineup around him. So that is going to wrap it up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. You can get a subscription for $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. You can find Eno on Twitter at Enosaris. Find me at Derek Van Riper. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Monday.
Can you hear me?